Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? I ask because no matter where you are in the world right now, you're about to journey back over 1,000 years to a time when the North Sea crashed against the shores of Denmark and Sweden, when great mead-halls echoed with the songs of warriors, and when monsters stalked the darkness beyond the firelight. In the winter of 1815, an Icelandic scholar named Grímur Jónsson Thorkelin published the first complete edition of a manuscript that had survived fire, neglect, and the passage of centuries. A manuscript that would fundamentally alter our understanding of early medieval literature and reveal the epic tale of a hero whose deeds would echo through the ages. The Cotton Vitellius A.xv manuscript, housed in the British Library and dating to around the year 1000, contained within its fire-damaged pages the only surviving copy of what scholars now recognize as one of the greatest epic poems in the English language, though it tells of Danish kings and Geatish warriors, of Swedish courts and the windswept lands that would become modern-day Scandinavia. This ancient text, composed by an unknown Anglo-Saxon poet sometime between the 7th and 11th centuries, preserves not merely a story of heroic adventure, but an entire worldview, a complex tapestry of pagan tradition and Christian thought, of warrior culture and royal politics, of the eternal struggle between civilization and the chaos that forever threatens to overwhelm it. The poem opens in the distant past, in the days when the Scyldings ruled the Danes, and the very first words establish both the grandeur and the melancholy that will permeate the entire narrative. For the poet begins not with birth but with death, not with beginning but with ending, telling us of Scyld Scefing, the legendary founder of the Danish royal line, who arrived mysteriously as a child and departed just as mysteriously when his time came to an end. Scyld, whose name means shield, had been discovered as an infant floating alone in a ship, surrounded by treasures but accompanied by no living soul, and the Danes took him in and raised him to become their king, a ruler so powerful that neighboring tribes paid him tribute and acknowledged his sovereignty over the whale roads, those ancient highways of the sea that connected the scattered communities of early medieval Scandinavia. When Scyld's time came to depart this world, the Danes honored him as he had first appeared to them, placing his body in a ship surrounded by weapons and treasures, golden goblets and ancient swords, rings and armor, and all the regalia of kingship, then pushing the vessel out into the dark waters to carry their beloved lord to whatever realm awaited him beyond the horizon, a funeral that would establish the template for royal burials throughout the Germanic world and provide archaeological evidence for the historical accuracy of the poem's cultural details. The throne of the Scyldings passed from father to son through the generations, each king adding to the glory of the dynasty, until it came to Hrothgar, called the Ring Giver, the treasure friend, the lord of the bright Danes, who surpassed all his predecessors in both wealth and wisdom, commanding such loyalty from his warriors that men flocked to his standard. From across the northern lands, in his pride and prosperity, Hrothgar conceived a great project that would serve as both a symbol of his power and a center for his court, a mead hall greater than any structure that had ever been built, a hall where his warriors could gather to feast and receive gifts, where poets could sing the old songs and new deeds could be celebrated, where the bonds of loyalty that held Germanic society together could be strengthened and renewed with each passing season. The hall that rose at Hrothgar's command was named Hero, the Heart, perhaps because its gabled roof resembled the antlers of a great stag, or because the deer was sacred to the gods of the old religion, or simply because the heart represented the grace and nobility that Hrothgar hoped his hall would embody. Archaeological excavations at sites like Lager in Denmark, believed by many scholars to be the location of the historical hero, reveal the impressive scale of such royal halls, with post holes indicating structures over 30 meters in length, capable of housing hundreds of warriors and retainers, with raised platforms for the high seat of the king and benches along the walls, where the warband could gather for the elaborate feasting ceremonies that were central to early medieval political culture. The construction of Hero represented more than royal ambition. It embodied the Anglo-Saxon ideal of the comitatus, the warrior band bound to their lord by oaths of personal loyalty, fed and equipped and rewarded by his generosity, ready to die in his service and share in his glory. Night after night, hero rang with celebration, the voices of warriors raised in song, the clatter of ale cups and the gleam of firelight on gold rings and polished spear points, the recitation of genealogies that connected the present generation to the heroes of the past, and above all the performance of the Scop, the court poet whose songs preserved the cultural memory of the people, and whose words could confer immortality upon the deeds of brave men. The poet tells us that the Scop sang of the creation of the world, how the Almighty made the earth and all its creatures, a detail that reveals the complex religious syncretism of the poem, which seamlessly blends pagan heroic tradition with Christian theology, suggesting that the unknown author was writing for an audience that had converted to Christianity, but retained deep respect for the old ways and the ancestral heroes who had lived before the gospel reached the northern lands. This golden age of celebration and prosperity in hero could not last, for the poem operates according to the inexorable logic of Germanic fate, the belief that all earthly joy is temporary and that darkness inevitably follows light, winter follows summer, and death follows life. The sounds of celebration that echoed from hero night after night disturbed a creature that dwelt in the darkness beyond the reach of human civilization, a monster named Grendel who traced his lineage back to Cain, the first murderer, whose descendants were condemned to exile from God's grace and human society. The poet's identification of Grendel as one of Cain's offspring represents a masterful fusion of biblical tradition with Germanic monster lore, explaining the creature's hostility to human happiness and his exclusion from the fellowship of the mead-hall, while also providing a theological framework for understanding the evil that threatens to destroy the ordered world of heroic culture. Grendel is described as a merkstapa, a boundary walker, one who exists at the margins between the civilized world and the chaotic wilderness, between light and darkness, between the world of men and the realm of monsters, and his very existence represents a fundamental challenge to the values and assumptions that underlie heroic society. For 12 years, Grendel terrorized the Danes, emerging from the misty moors under cover of darkness to attack hero when the warriors slept, killing and devouring Hrothgar's men, carrying off their bodies to his underwater lair, immune to weapons and apparently invincible, and his supernatural strength and malice. The hall that had been built as a symbol of royal power and communal celebration became a place of horror and mourning. Abandoned at night, its benches empty, its fires cold, while Hrothgar and his counselors searched desperately for some solution to their torment. They consulted the old books of wisdom, sought the advice of soothsayers, and even, in their desperation, returned to the ancient heathen practices their ancestors had abandoned when they accepted Christianity, praying to the old gods and making sacrifices at stone altars. Though the poet makes clear that such pagan rituals could provide no help against the monster, for only the true God possessed the power to deliver them from their affliction. The fame of Hrothgar's plight spread across the northern seas, carried by traders and travelers to distant lands, until word reached the court of Hrothgar, king of the Geats, whose realm lay in what is now southern Sweden, across the Kattegat Strait from Denmark. Among Hrothgar's warriors was a young hero named Beowulf, whose very name has been the subject of extensive scholarly debate, with some interpreting it as Beowulf, meaning bear, while others suggest Battlewolf are connected to various Germanic mythological traditions. But regardless of its exact etymology, the name clearly marks its bearer as someone extraordinary, set apart from ordinary men by his exceptional strength and courage. Beowulf was not merely one warrior among many. He was Hygelaic's nephew, a member of the royal family, blessed with supernatural strength that the poet describes as the power of 30 men in his grip, and driven by an insatiable desire for fame. and glory that could only be achieved through heroic deeds performed in the face of mortal danger. When Beowulf heard of Grendel's attacks on Hero, he immediately resolved to sail across the sea to Denmark and offer his services to Hrothgar, not for gold or political advantage, but for the opportunity to win eternal renown by accomplishing what no Danish warrior had been able to achieve. The decision to undertake this dangerous mission reflects the fundamental values of Germanic, heroic culture, where a warrior's worth was measured not by his years but by his deeds, where death in battle was preferable to a long life without glory, and where the pursuit of fame could justify any risk. For only fame could survive the grave and grant a form of immortality to those bold enough to grasp it. Beowulf selected 14 of his best warriors to accompany him on this perilous voyage, men whose loyalty to their young lord outweighed their natural fear of the unknown dangers that awaited them in a foreign land, and together they prepared a seaworthy vessel for the journey across the whale road, loading it with weapons and armor, provisions for the voyage, and the gifts appropriate for presentation to a foreign king. The ship they chose was undoubtedly similar to those discovered by archaeologists at sites like Sutton Hoo and Goxted. Elegant vessels designed for both warfare and long-distance travel, with shallow drafts that allowed them to navigate rivers, as well as open seas. Decorated prows that could strike fear into enemies or announce the peaceful intentions of their crews, and sophisticated construction techniques that enabled them to flex with the waves rather than break apart in heavy weather. The voyage from Geatland to Denmark would have taken the better part of a day, under favorable conditions, with the crew taking turns at the oars when the wind failed, navigating by landmarks and celestial observation, constantly alert for the sudden storms that could rise without warning in the North Sea, and send even experienced sailors to the bottom. The poet describes their arrival on the Danish coast in terms that emphasize both the beauty of their ship and the martial appearance of its crew. Their mail shirts gleaming in the sunlight, their spears standing like a forest of ash wood, their shields locked together along the gunwales in the manner of Viking raiders, who would terrorize these same coasts in later centuries. The Danish Coast Guard, who first encountered these armed strangers, was both impressed by their obvious nobility and concerned about their intentions. For the arrival of foreign warriors could mean either welcome assistance or dangerous invasion, and his duty required him to determine which category these Geats represented before allowing them to proceed and land toward the royal hall. The Coast Guard's challenge to Beowulf and his men reveals the complex diplomatic protocols that governed relations between the various Germanic kingdoms, where safe passage required not merely the announcement of peaceful intentions but the recitation of genealogies that establish one's identity and social standing, the naming of one's lord and the purpose of one's mission, and the demonstration through word and bearing that one deserved the respect due to a nobleman, rather than the treatment appropriate for a common raider or exile. Beowulf's response to this challenge displays his mastery of the formal rhetoric expected from a hero of his status, identifying himself as Hygelac's kinsman, explaining his mission to assist Hrothgar against Grendel, and speaking with such dignity and conviction that the Coast Guard immediately recognized him as a legitimate ambassador, rather than a threat to Danish security. The Guard not only granted them permission to proceed, but offered to have their ship watched over by his men while they were inland, a gesture of hospitality that reflects the sacred duty of protection owed to guests and the complex reciprocal obligations that bound the warrior aristocracy of the early medieval North together in networks of mutual assistance and shared honor. The journey from the coast to Hero took Beowulf and his men across the Danish landscape, through forests and across rivers, past the scattered farmsteads and villages that supported the warrior elite, along Roman roads that still functioned centuries after the legions had withdrawn, past ancient burial mounds that marked the graves of forgotten heroes, through a countryside that bore the scars of Grendel's 12-year reign of terror, in the form of abandoned settlements and defensive fortifications that offered little protection against a supernatural enemy. As they approached Hrothgar's royal residence, the travelers would have seen first the smoke rising from the cooking fires, then the gleam of Hero's golden roof catching the sunlight, then the impressive complex of buildings that surrounded the Great Hall, including the private chambers of the royal family, the workshops where skilled craftsmen created the weapons and jewelry that served as symbols of royal power, the storehouses where tribute was kept and redistributed to maintain the loyalty of the warband, and the various outbuildings necessary to support a royal court that might include hundreds of people at any given time. The sight of Hero itself must have been overwhelming to visitors, for the poet describes it as the greatest of halls, its walls rising high above the surrounding landscape, its roof covered with gold that blazed like fire in the sunlight, its doors wide enough to admit 100 warriors at once, its interior space vast enough to accommodate feasting and ceremony on a scale that proclaimed the power and generosity of its owner to all who entered. The architectural details provided in the poem correspond closely to archaeological evidence from sites like Old Uppsala in Sweden and the great halls excavated in Denmark, with their high seat pillars carved with religious symbols, their long fire hearths running down the center of the hall, their raised platforms where the king and his most honored guests could dine while observing the celebration below, and their elaborate system of benches and tables that reflected the strict hierarchies of Germanic court society. Beowulf and his men announced their arrival at Hero by striking their spears against their shields in the traditional manner, a sound that brought Hrothgar's herald rushing to investigate. For the arrival of armed strangers at the royal hall was always a matter of the highest importance, potentially signaling either welcome reinforcement or deadly threat. The herald, whose name was Wulfgar and who served as Hrothgar's spokesperson in dealing with foreign visitors, questioned the Geats about their identity and intentions with the same diplomatic formality that the Coast Guard had employed, but with an additional layer of courtly sophistication that reflected his position at the center of royal power and his responsibility for protecting the king from potential harm. Beowulf's response to Wulfgar demonstrated his understanding of court protocol and his respect for Hrothgar's authority, requesting an audience with the king and explaining his mission in terms that emphasized both his loyalty to his own lord, Hygelac, and his desire to serve Hrothgar by ridding Hero of its monstrous tormentor. Wulfgar was sufficiently impressed by Beowulf's bearing and eloquence to carry his message directly to Hrothgar, praising the young Geat's apparent nobility and recommending that the king grant him an immediate audience, for experienced courtiers could usually distinguish between genuine heroes and mere boasters, and everything about Beowulf suggested that he possessed the exceptional qualities necessary to succeed where others had failed. When Hrothgar heard Beowulf's name and lineage, his response revealed the complex web of relationships that connected the royal houses of early medieval Scandinavia. For he remembered Beowulf's father Ecgtheow, who had once sought refuge at the Danish court after becoming involved in a blood feud that threatened his life, and whom Hrothgar had protected by paying the appropriate compensation to his enemies, thus creating a bond of obligation that now extended to Ecgtheow's son. The king also recalled hearing reports of Beowulf's extraordinary strength and his victories in swimming contests and battles with sea monsters, adventures that had already established his reputation as a hero of unusual prowess even before his arrival in Denmark. Hrothgar's decision to receive Beowulf immediately, rather than requiring him to wait for a more formal audience, demonstrated both his desperate need for assistance against Grendel and his recognition that this young Geat might indeed possess the supernatural strength necessary to defeat a monster that had proven invulnerable to conventional weapons. The meeting between Beowulf and Hrothgar in the Great Hall of Hero represents one of the most carefully constructed scenes in the entire poem, establishing the relationship between the young hero and the aging king, defining the terms of Beowulf's mission and providing crucial information about the nature of the threat they face together. Hrothgar's greeting acknowledges both his personal connection to Beowulf's family, and his hope that the young warrior might succeed where his own men have failed, while also revealing the depth of his despair after 12 years of watching his people suffer under Grendel's attacks. The king describes the monster's nightly raids in detail. That emphasizes both the creature's supernatural power and his apparent immunity to human weapons, explaining how the bravest Danish warriors have tried and failed to defeat him, their swords useless against his hide, their courage meaningless in the face of his overwhelming strength. Beowulf's response to this challenge reveals the complex psychology of the Germanic hero, who views death in battle not as a tragedy to be avoided, but as an opportunity to win eternal fame, and who measures his worth not by his chances of survival, but by the magnitude of the dangers he is willing to face. The young Geat announces his intention to meet Grendel without weapons or armor, trusting in his supernatural hand strength and his fate to determine the outcome. A decision that reflects not reckless bravado, but a sophisticated understanding of the heroic code that required extraordinary measures to achieve extraordinary fame. This commitment to fight the monster on equal terms, without the advantages that weapons and armor might provide, transforms what could have been a simple combat into a test of divine favor. For in a world where supernatural strength was seen as a gift from God, victory achieved through purely natural means would carry greater glory than success accomplished through superior equipment. The theological implications of Beowulf's decision become clear in his statement that God will decide who dies in the coming battle, a declaration that places his fate entirely in divine hands, while simultaneously asserting his confidence that his cause is just and that his actions serve the will of heaven. The feast that Hrothgar ordered in honor of his guests followed the elaborate protocols of Germanic hospitality, with the king himself serving mead to Beowulf in a ceremonial cup that symbolized the bond of trust and mutual obligation being established between them, while the queen, Wealhtheow, whose very name means foreign slave and suggests her origins as a peace weaver, married to cement an alliance between formerly hostile tribes, gracefully performed her role as hostess by offering drink to each of the honored guests in order of their rank and importance. The seating arrangements in Hero reflected the complex hierarchies of early medieval court society, with Hrothgar occupying the high seat that marked him as absolute ruler. His most trusted advisors and kinsmen seated nearby where they could participate in royal deliberations. Visiting dignitaries like Beowulf granted places of honor that acknowledged their status, without challenging the authority of their hosts, and the various levels of the warband arranged according to their achievements in proximity to royal favor. The entertainment provided during the feast included the performance of the Scop, whose songs celebrated the deeds of ancient heroes and provided both moral instruction and cultural continuity, connecting the present generation to the glorious past and inspiring contemporary warriors to emulate the courage and loyalty of their ancestors. The poet mentioned specifically that the Scop sang of the fight at Finnsburg, a complex tale of blood feud and revenge that would have been familiar to the poem's original audience, and that serves as a parallel to the main narrative, exploring themes of loyalty divided between competing obligations and the tragic consequences that can result when heroic ideals conflict with practical necessity. As the evening wore on and the mead flowed freely, the atmosphere in Hero became increasingly festive, with warriors boasting of their past achievements and their plans for future glory, gift-giving that demonstrated royal generosity and strengthened the bonds of loyalty between lord and retainer, and the general celebration that marked the return of hope to a hall that had been shadowed by fear for 12 long years. However, the festivities were marred by an incident that revealed the tensions lurking beneath the surface of courtly politeness, when a warrior named Unferth, described as Hrothgar's spokesman and a man of considerable influence in the Danish court, challenged Beowulf's reputation by recounting a version of his swimming contest with Brecka that portrayed the Geat hero as reckless and ultimately defeated. Unferth's motivation for this public challenge was complex. involving perhaps jealousy at the attention being paid to a foreign warrior, concerned that Beowulf's boastful claims might prove empty and bring further disaster upon the Danes, or simply the need to test the character of this stranger who had made such extraordinary promises about his ability to defeat Grendel. The specific details of Unferth's accusation revealed the importance of reputation in heroic society, where a warrior's past achievements served as the only reliable guide to his future performance, and where any doubt about his courage or competence could undermine confidence in his ability to fulfill his promises. According to Unferth, Beowulf and Breca had engaged in a foolish swimming contest in the open sea, competing to see who could survive longest in the icy waters. But Beowulf had been defeated after 7 days and nights, washed ashore exhausted and humiliated, while Breca completed his journey successfully and was acclaimed by his people for his achievement. The implication of this story was clear. If Beowulf had failed in a contest with a mortal opponent under relatively controlled conditions, how could he hope to succeed against a supernatural monster who had already killed countless Danish warriors? Beowulf's response to this challenge represents a masterpiece of heroic rhetoric, simultaneously defending his reputation, correcting Unferth's version of events, and turning the accusation back upon his accuser in a manner that demonstrated both his quick wit and his mastery of the verbal skills that were as important as physical prowess in establishing one's status in warrior society. The Geat hero began by acknowledging the basic facts of Unferth's story, while fundamentally reframing their significance, explaining that he and Breca had indeed competed in a swimming contest, but that their motivation had been the innocent boasting of youth rather than reckless disregard for danger, and that the contest had been prolonged not by his weakness, but by his determination to protect his friend from the sea monsters that attacked them during their ordeal. According to Beowulf's account, he had killed 9 sea creatures during the contest, fighting with his sword while treading water in the freezing North Sea, and had only been separated from Breca when powerful currents carried them in different directions, allowing both to reach shore safely after demonstrating their exceptional courage and endurance. The climax of Beowulf's response was his counterattack on Unferth himself, pointing out that despite the Dane's reputation for cleverness with words, he had never achieved any deeds worthy of song, and had in fact committed the most heinous crime possible in Germanic society by killing his own brothers, an act of kinslaying that had condemned his soul to hell regardless of whatever worldly success he might achieve. This accusation struck at the heart of heroic culture, where loyalty to one's family was the most fundamental obligation, and where fraternal murder represented the complete breakdown of the social bonds that held civilization together. The poet's inclusion of this detail about Unferth serves multiple purposes in the narrative. It establishes Beowulf's superiority not only in physical prowess, but in moral character. It provides insight into the complex and sometimes violent relationships within Hrothgar's court, and it foreshadows later themes in the poem concerning the destructive potential of conflicts within the warrior band. Beowulf concluded his response to Unferth's challenge with a confident prediction of his success against Grendel, attributing his expected victory to God's favor and his own determination, while simultaneously praising Hrothgar and the Danes in a manner that demonstrated his diplomatic skills and his understanding of the need to maintain good relations with his hosts even while defending himself against their criticism. The effect of this exchange was to establish Beowulf's credibility beyond doubt, for his response had demonstrated exactly the combination of physical courage, quick thinking, and verbal skill that marked a true hero, while also revealing Unferth's moral failings and questionable motivations in a way that discredited his challenge and restored confidence in the Geat's ability to fulfill his promises. As the evening drew to a close and the time approached for the Danish warriors to depart for their homes, leaving Hero empty and vulnerable to Grendel's attack, Hrothgar addressed Beowulf one final time, formally entrusting the hall to his protection and promising rich rewards if he succeeded in defeating the monster. The king's speech on this occasion reveals the psychological toll that 12 years of failure and loss had taken upon him, transforming a once confident ruler into an old man haunted by his inability to protect his people, dependent upon the assistance of a foreign warrior barely out of his youth, yet still hopeful that divine providence might finally bring an end to his suffering. Hrothgar's promise of reward was not merely a matter of diplomatic courtesy, but a recognition of the economic realities underlying heroic culture, where warriors served their lords in exchange for weapons, armor, gold rings, and other valuable gifts that marked their status and provided for their material needs, and where the failure to reward loyal service appropriately could lead to the breakdown of the entire system of personal loyalty that held early medieval society together. The departure of the Danish warriors from Hero left Beowulf and his 14 Geatish companions alone in the great hall, faced with the prospect of a night-long vigil waiting for Grendel's arrival, uncertain whether their confidence in their leader's abilities was justified or whether they were about to meet the same fate as the hundreds of Danes who had already fallen victim to the monster's attacks. The poet describes their preparations for the coming battle in terms that emphasize both their courage and their realistic understanding of the dangers they face, as they removed their armor and set aside their weapons in accordance with Beowulf's vow to meet Grendel on equal terms, while also posting guards and making what arrangements they can to ensure that at least some word of their fate will reach their homeland. If they do not survive the night, the psychological tension of this waiting period is masterfully conveyed through the poet's description of the hall, settling into an unnatural silence, broken only by the crackling of the dying fires and the distant sounds of the night, while outside in the darkness something monstrous begins to stir. Sensing the presence of human prey and preparing for another night of slaughter, the poet's account of Grendel's approach to Hero builds suspense through careful attention to atmospheric detail, describing how the creature emerges from the misty moors where he makes his home, crosses the cold hillsides under cover of darkness, and draws near to the hall where his enemies wait, driven by a fury that has been building throughout the day as he anticipates his revenge upon those who dare to celebrate in the place he has claimed as his own territory. The monster's physical appearance, as revealed when he finally breaks into the hall, confirms his supernatural nature while also grounding him in the landscape and folklore of early medieval Scandinavia, where creatures like him were believed to inhabit the wild places beyond human settlement, emerging under cover of darkness to prey upon the unwary. The poet describes Grendel as possessing immense size and strength, with claws capable of tearing through the strongest armor, eyes that glow with an unnatural fire, and a hide that no weapon can penetrate, characteristics that mark him as fundamentally different from human opponents and place the coming battle in the realm of the supernatural, rather than ordinary warfare. The monster's method of entering Hero demonstrates both his enormous strength and his familiarity with the hall's construction, as he tears away the iron-reinforced door that has been barred against him and strides into the interior with the confidence of a predator entering territory he has claimed through years of successful hunting. Grendel's immediate killing and devouring of one of Beowulf's men serves multiple narrative purposes. It establishes the reality of the threat the monster poses, demonstrates his savage nature and supernatural appetite, and creates a sense of urgency that transforms the abstract prospect of battle into an immediate life or death struggle. The death of this unnamed Geatish warrior also emphasizes the courage required of Beowulf's companions, who must witness this horrific fate while maintaining their discipline and following their leader's plan, trusting in his judgment even as they see graphic evidence of what awaits them if he fails. The moment of actual combat between Beowulf and Grendel represents the climax, toward which the entire first section of the poem has been building, and the poet handles it with a combination of visceral detail and symbolic significance that elevates the encounter from a simple fight scene to a cosmic struggle between the forces of civilization and chaos, light and darkness, good and evil. The battle begins when Grendel reaches for Beowulf, expecting to find another helpless victim, but instead encountering a grip stronger than any he has ever experienced. A grip that immediately reveals to the monster that he faces not an ordinary human warrior, but something unprecedented in his long career of slaughter. The poet's description of Beowulf's hand grip emphasizes its supernatural character, while also maintaining the poem's consistent preference for realistic detail over magical fantasy, explaining that the hero's strength comes not from enchanted weapons or mystical spells, but from the natural gifts that God has granted him. Gifts that become supernatural only in their extraordinary degree, rather than their fundamental nature. The psychological dimension of the battle is as important as its physical aspects, for the poet reveals that Grendel experiences fear for the first time in his existence, suddenly understanding that he has encountered an opponent who not only can match his strength, but who fights with the backing of divine authority, transforming what the monster expected to be routine predation into a battle for his very survival. The creature's attempt to flee from Hero when he realizes the true nature of his opponent serves to humanize him in a way that makes his ultimate defeat more tragic, while also demonstrating that even supernatural evil recognizes the superior power of good when confronted with it directly and without compromise. The physical details of the struggle between hero and monster are described with careful attention to the architectural setting as the two combatants crash into the walls and pillars of Hero, their battle threatening to destroy the very hull that Beowulf has come to save, while the sound of their conflict echoes across the Danish countryside and fills the hearts of listeners with terror at the superhuman forces being unleashed within the royal residence. The poet emphasizes that no weapon could have harmed Grendel, validating Beowulf's decision to fight without sword or spear, while also making clear that the hero's victory comes through the application of his God-given strength rather than through any supernatural intervention that would diminish his personal achievement. The climactic moment of the battle arrives when Beowulf manages to tear Grendel's arm from his body at the shoulder, an injury so severe that it ensures the monster's death while also providing proof of the victory that can be displayed for all to see. The severing of Grendel's arm represents more than just a fatal wound. It symbolizes the breaking of the monster's power over Hero and the restoration of the hull to its rightful function as a center of celebration and community, while the trophy itself serves as tangible evidence that the long nightmare is finally over and that normal life can resume. Grendel's flight from Hero with his mortal wound takes him back across the moors to his underwater lair, where he dies in agony, his blood staining the dark waters red and announcing to all the creatures of the wilderness that a new order has been established, one in which human courage backed by divine favor can triumph over even the most ancient and powerful forces of evil. The morning after the battle brings a transformation in the atmosphere around Hero, as warriors and common people alike come from far and wide to see the evidence of Beowulf's victory and to celebrate the end of Grendel's reign of terror. The poet describes how men follow the monster's bloody trail across the countryside to the mere, where he had his dwelling, a dark and forbidding body of water that reflects the supernatural evil of its inhabitant, surrounded by frost-covered trees and haunted by unnatural creatures, a place so ominous that even hunting hounds will not enter its waters when pursuing their prey. The discovery of this lair provides additional confirmation of Grendel's death, while also serving as a reminder of the otherworldly nature of the threat that has been eliminated. For the mere represents a boundary between the human world and the realm of monsters, a place where the normal rules of nature do not apply and where supernatural evil has made its home. The celebration that follows Beowulf's victory takes the form of an elaborate ceremony that combines Danish thanksgiving with Geatish triumph, as Hrothgar formally acknowledges the young hero's achievement and begins the process of rewarding him with the gifts appropriate to such an extraordinary service. The king's speech on this occasion reveals both his genuine gratitude and his understanding of the political implications of what has occurred. For Beowulf's success has not only saved the Danes from Grendel's attacks, but has also established a new bond between the Geatish and Danish royal houses that could prove valuable in future political and military situations. The gifts that Hrothgar presents to Beowulf include a golden standard, a helmet and mail shirt of exceptional craftsmanship, a sword that had belonged to Danish royalty, and 8 horses with golden bridles, wealth sufficient to establish the recipient as a major figure in his own right and to demonstrate the magnitude of Danish gratitude for his service. The presentation of these gifts follows ancient protocols that transform simple objects into symbols of honor and relationship, each item carrying meanings that extend far beyond its material value, to encompass concepts of loyalty, alliance, and mutual obligation that will bind the two peoples together for generations to come. The poet's detailed description of these treasures reflects the central importance of gift-giving in early medieval political culture, where the circulation of valuable objects served not only to reward faithful service, but also to create and maintain the networks of reciprocal obligation that held society together. In the absence of strong central institutions, the Queen Wealthios' participation in the ceremony adds another layer of meaning to the proceedings, for her role as cupbearer and her gracious words of thanks to Beowulf demonstrate the involvement of the entire royal family in acknowledging his achievement, while her specific request that he serve as protector and advisor to her young sons reveals the political calculations that underlie even the most heartfelt expressions of gratitude. The feast that celebrates Beowulf's victory represents the restoration of Hero to its intended function as a center of joy and community, with the great hall once again filled with the sounds of celebration, the songs of the scop, and the generous distribution of gifts that mark a successful and prosperous reign. The poet includes in his description of this feast another performance by the court singer, this time the story of Hildebrand the tragedy at Finnsburg, a complex narrative of marriage alliance, betrayal, and revenge that serves as a cautionary tale about the difficulties of maintaining peace between hostile peoples and the tragic consequences that can result when political marriages fail to achieve their intended purpose of preventing warfare. This tale within a tale serves multiple functions in the overall structure of the poem, providing entertainment for the characters while also offering moral instruction to the audience about the fragility